Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. Today, we're joined by the wonderful Scott Adkins to talk about his latest project, One Shot. And I wanted to start by talking about the fact that you and James Nunn, who's the writer and director on this project, have been talking about the idea of filming an an action film that has a singular take throughout the entire project since about 2015, and was interested in a lot of the conversations that the two of you have had over the years in terms of a project like this, and how you really wanted to use it not as something that felt like a gimmick, but something that really brings us into the story and into these characters in a really different way, in the way that you've managed to execute it.
Yeah, so it was 2015 and we were doing a movie called Eliminators, my second film with James. And we actually had like an extended one shot sort of fight sequence in that movie. So anyway, when it finished, that's when we came up with the idea, let's do an action film, the whole thing in one shot. And a film had been done before in one shot, but never an action film at that time. And this was way before 1917, obviously, and all the rest of it. But yeah, we felt like the unbroken take has a way of sort of like, it feels like it's pulling you in as you're watching it, and it's dragging you in. And before you, because there's no edits, it's kind of hard to take your eyes off the screen. It's like I don't miss anything. And also it has that feeling of like you're actually there as a member of, you're actually seeing it, you're viewing it through your own eyes. It's like a piece of theater. And then when you combine that with the action elements, which, a lot of that is so technical, when you can see that done all in one go and it feels more real and visceral. If you could do that with a fight scene or a gunfight or whatever, it's a great thing to see. And so we wanted to do it. It only took us 6 years, but we got there eventually.
Well, I'm glad you did, because the effect is really fantastic. And I love that you were bringing up a movie like The Eliminators, where you had a longer one take action scene. And you've obviously done multiple projects that have had that moment, and mentioned how, in terms of action sequences, that's something that you often really gravitate towards, those moments to do those much longer takes and to do a sequence that is a one shot. And so how for you was this project really a culmination of all of those moments where you've had the opportunity to do that in different projects, and really looking at the specific skill set that it requires to execute that on a much grander scale as you're doing it throughout the entire film in this one?
Well, I've done a lot of one take action sequences in various other movies. So I consider myself to be a bit of a connoisseur. I knew how to do the action part of it. What we needed to really figure out was to hide those magic cuts. So it's like seemingly one continuous take, because it's an action film. It's 96 minutes. It happens in real time, which is great. And we made sure we built the story around the concept as well. So we wanted a very tight, claustrophobic sort of story that rises and rises and rises in tension. So we got that from the script, but then we had to figure out, well, how are we logistically going to do that? Like, you've written the script, but now we need a place to do it. So then we had to find the location. Once we found the location, it was like, oh, okay, this is feasible. We can do it. We're going to have to hide some bits to go from here to the other side of the park or whatever. But then when we had that, you could go back and rewrite the script according to the location you had, because, in the script, you might be walking from A to B. But that journey in reality, in the script, is like a minute, but in reality, it takes a minute and a half to get there. But we're going to have to come up with 30 seconds more of dialogue. Otherwise, we're just walking, not saying anything. All those little things we had to figure out. But mostly was those to hide those cuts seamlessly. And there's different ways of doing that, different techniques. And we were almost like kids in a candy store. It's like, well, let's try this one this time, see how that works. And we tried different stuff. We didn't want to rely on the same thing, because you'll figure out how we did it. And some of them worked better than others. And if we got to do a sequel, we'd be experts now, and we probably wouldn't try some of the ones that were very hard. But yeah, I mean, very rewarding in that way, to try and figure out how to do it and pull it off. And I have to say, I'm really happy with how the film turned out, because not only is that there's the technical side of it, which I think is pretty seamless, but to have a story that works as well as it does in real time, 96 minutes, I think we really pulled it off.
And you're bringing up there the fact that it is told in real time. What was the unique aspect for you in developing a character and exploring his entire emotional arc within real time? Because it brings us to that point where we meet him in one singular location, one singular instance of things happening around him, versus getting to see him in different circumstances, different spaces, different relationship dynamics. It really is all about all of his Navy SEAL training in the workplace and what happens when he has to really call on all of his facets in that moment.
Yeah, well, obviously, there's not a lot of time for character development in a film that's happening in real time like that. And for my part, I felt like, honestly, it wasn't that important what this guy's past was, because my take on it was I'm a Navy SEAL. I'm all about the mission. Whatever I've got going on in my life right now, I set it to the side. The mission is key. And that's what I thought all these guys would be like that. And from speaking to these guys, it's all about the objective. You've got to follow the orders and you've got to get the mission done. So for my character, I'm arriving in this situation and something goes on. It's got to be dealt with. And the main thing that I held on to as a character was you follow orders. That's the chain of command. That's the most important thing. But I'm realizing as we go through it that my superiors have not told me all the information that I should know. And so I'm questioning things like that. So as an actor, that was what was going on with me. And I think I forgot the other part of the question. But yeah, the backstory wasn't as important for me because it's so driven by this is the problem, this is the situation, we've got to get out of it. How is that done?
And because obviously you're talking there about the fact that he puts everything else aside and his training is so much about leaving the emotion out of it and really just focusing on the mission at hand, was there a challenge at all in creating a performance that still had that same engagement level and really drew the audience in when it's not necessarily as emotional of a landscape for a character? Or was it something that because of the way that you were filming it and the way that we're experiencing the story that it actually wasn't a challenge that came across with this project at all?
Well, I think like the character Mansur, played by Waleed, like his character was he had more growth in a way because, and I'm proud of the fact that we didn't just have a stereotypical, oh, he's a bad guy. You're not sure what it is, and his reasons, whether it's him or not, his reasons for being there in the first place are very relatable. The things that's happened in his life. We didn't want to make, and then when we go out with the terrorists as well, we see a guy who's willing to sacrifice himself for a cause, and you really feel for that lad, what he's going through at that time. So there was certainly depth to all the characters in terms of they felt very real and the stakes were very real. And even though it's a high concept action film, I'm very proud of the drama that's within there, and the actors did a fantastic job. And so, I think it works. Technically, you can watch it and have fun, like, oh, where are the cuts and all the rest of it. But I think the best compliment I've got from talking to people is that they do get caught up in the story and they forget about this one shot thing, and they just invested in the journey of these characters.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the way that it executes. And one of the other interesting aspects for your character is because of his training and the fact that it is mission focused again, it also means that he's not someone who's trying to make the biggest choice. He's trying to make the right choice. And so it's not necessarily about what's the most dramatic way to respond to a situation, what's visually going to look, really encapsulating on screen. It's about the nuance of going into a space, surveying a situation, making fast choices and fast decisions. And so how did you set about thinking about a lot of the choices that you made in that particular way, where it really is about the right choice instead of what's the most dramatic moment for a film?
Well, for my character, the whole thing was the chain of command. And there's Lieutenant York, played by Ryan Felipe, who's telling me point blank that I cannot do this because your superiors don't want you to do this. And I really believe in the chain of command. But at the same time, I'm looking at Ashley Greene's character, who's so steadfast in her beliefs, and I might have to make a decision that's in conflict with the chain of command. And really, for me, that was my character's arc. Is like, I've got to follow. I'm all about what my superiors think, and that's how the military exists. It's built on the chain of command, and when you deviate from that, you're talking about court martials and all the rest of it. It's not something you can do lightly. And he has to make that decision at the end, which we won't go into because spoilers. But yeah, I think that was a lot to do with my character and how he changes. But again, it was the mission and the decisions he has to make within the mission that was more interesting than anything he's got going on back in wherever he's from.
Yeah. And you were mentioning earlier how you had conversations with people who've gone through that specific training as well. And that was where you got the idea of, okay, he's leaving everything behind in this moment. And it really is that centralized focus. What were some of the other research facets that really came into play in your performance from conversations, particularly that you were having with a lot of these people?
Well, I've played military characters a lot. So I know I didn't need to, I know what it takes to hold a gun. I know how to move like an army guy. Honestly, a lot of my research I probably shouldn't have been doing it, but I wanted to make sure that we knew how to achieve this goal of the one shot conceit. You know what I mean? I'm friends with Sam Hargrave, who directed Extraction, which had this extended 10-minute sequence. So we're able to, he helped us a lot. We had a chat with Sam and just the logistics of how we're going to achieve that. I mean, for me, I arrived 2 weeks before we started shooting to start work on the action sequences, and very involved with that side of things with our fight director, Tim Mann. And then a week before we started shooting, we had all the actors there and we were able to start rehearsing all the different sequences because we wanted to be ready as actors and have everything worked out so that we're ready to go. But also we needed to block it out and know what all the actors felt. As a director, you don't want to block for the actors, right? You want it to come organically from them. That has to happen that way. So we got everyone in there early so that we could make those decisions and then get the camera team in and figure out, okay, what are the best shots? And then how are we going to do these magic cuts? And how are we going to get from A to B seamlessly? All those logistical things had to be worked out, which, was trying to be involved in, sticking my big nose in.
But I mean, one of the most impressive things when you look at it is the seamlessness between the shots and the way that they're able to edit them together. And like you said, that's no easy feat because it's very much about where are we coming into the scene, where is the camera, and having to literally land such a specific motion as opposed to okay, you're standing here and if you're right here, it doesn't matter. You have to be in exactly that singular place without almost like a centimeter of difference. And so what did that look like in terms of you all mapping out and making sure that the visual in point and out point for every single scene was going to land in exactly the point that it needed so that when they edited it, that they could execute it in this way?
It was a dance between the whole team, the actors, the camera crew, the boom operator, the first AD, everyone's working to get that perfect take. The lighting, I trying to keep the lighting not too complex because, normally you're trying not to, cast a shadow on the other actor's face and all that. And there was that there, but the best decision James, the director, made, I think, was how he wanted to present the cinematography with a very handheld, immediate sort of almost documentary feel to it. And he wanted to always stick the camera on the shoulder of a certain character, whichever character it felt like was driving the scene, stay with them. But he never made the camera move unless it was motivated by a character. It's not just going to wander off over there. It is always sort of linked on a certain character's shoulders. And I think, like, you look at something like 1917, which is technically incredible, and it's silky smooth, cinematography, Deakins and all the rest of it. It's brilliant. But whereas is different, it's a bit more down, it's a bit more dirty. But I think it really helps with the intense story that we're telling as well. So yeah, everyone just had to work together. And you'd have like a 10-minute take to do that day, and on all day you've got to do that. And so you'd rehearse it before lunch, and you'd figure out all the mechanics. Everyone would go and eat lunch. I'd have a small lunch because I didn't want to feel weighed down. I'd be looking forward to my dinner. And then for the rest of the afternoon, you would try and get the perfect version of that take. And sometimes we'd be outside and we're just waiting for the cloud cover to come. because it never looks great when the sun's blasting down on your actors anyway. So we're hoping that the cloud will come over, we can start, and it's going to match with what we've just done previously. We're also hoping that by the time we get to the end of that part of that take, that the sun has not come out, because then we're really in trouble. But sometimes that did happen and we just had to go with it. And then the next day we're waiting for the sun to come out. The weather was the worst.
It's also really striking when you look at the visuals as well, in the fact that there's a lot of close-up intimacy with the camera as well, because that also offers a lot less forgiveness. You can't just shift the frame over a little bit in editing, because you're going to lose that close-up and the emotion that you're trying to capture. And did that really infiltrate and evolve the relationship and the dynamic that you had to have as an actor with the cinematographer and with the camera operating team? Because you're always working so intricately on action scenes and any scene in a movie, but obviously when you're doing these close-ups and with all of the beats that you're talking about, was there a difference in the dynamic that you had to have together?
Well, sometimes the operator would have it on his shoulder, and then depending on what we needed to achieve, other times we would have a version of that camera where he could hold it like this, and it was kind of almost like he's holding the lens, and I don't know the technical stuff, but then there was a wire, and there's a guy with a rucksack behind him following him everywhere. And sometimes if he's going to do a shot like that 180, the guy holding the rucksack, he's got to get out of the way, and there's this crazy dance going around the back of the camera. So as an actor, you can feel the lens here, and you're working with the actor, and then you can see all this hustle and bustle going on around it, like it's like being in a circus, just laughable stuff going on, people falling over. And, sometimes you've got to help get out of the way in order to let him through a door and things like that. And then other times it was just about, we have to finish up in a specific position. Well, most of the time start in a very specific position, because that may be needed for the entry point to that cut. And it's very technical, like that you're there. Like I could be here with a gun for ages. My shoulders are aching and I have to keep the gun up and get it in the perfect position so that it matches with that wipe cut or something like that. And it was laborious sometimes, but that was what we were doing.
I mean, overall, was there a different type of mental weight and feeling of responsibility? Because I think there's maybe one scene in the film that you're not in, but you're basically in every single frame throughout this entire film, and it is those really long takes. And for the crew as well, but especially for you don't want to get to the end of an 8-minute take when you know everything that everybody's doing in order to pull that together and be the person that drops the ball in that moment. So is there a different type of psychology and concentration that you needed to be able to reach for it?
You don't want to be the one that fluffs the line. And then everyone's like, oh, for God's sakes, we're 8 minutes into that scene and it was going great, and you decided to say the Germans are crumbing. You don't want to be that guy. And sometimes you would, like the very first one we do, we're coming in the helicopter, and then we get out of the helicopter and there's a lot of technical stuff going on, removing green screens and all the rest of it, wind blowers, extras and all this stuff. And then you've got Terence Maynard, who walks up like 6 minutes into the first shot, and he's got loads of dialogue. So it's worse for him, because by the time we've got to his bit, we're all like, oh yeah, we've done really well. And the pressure's built up for him now. He doesn't want to be the one to blow it. And sometimes you would, but of course you don't want to put too much pressure on yourself, because you want to stay in the moment, relaxed, ready to go with the flow. But at the same time, you sort of tense, thinking, oh, don't be the one to blow it.
I mean, in terms of the dialogue for your character overall, that's also a really interesting aspect to look at, because the film's much more dialogue heavy earlier in the film, and later a lot of what these characters are going through, it doesn't make sense for them to even be communicating. They're walking through, they're in dangerous, perilous situations, and if they suddenly are like, hey, what do you see around the corner, everything's gonna literally explode. And so there's a lot more moments that rely on the quietness and the internalization of your character. And so did you find that you were pulling from different types of facets in terms of your performance because of that?
I mean, yeah, the action is sort of loaded towards the back. I mean, that's not something I need to concern myself with as much, because I've done so many action films at this point. Something that's interesting and what we had to do is, like, there's other movies that have had like one take action scenes that are phenomenal. and you want to try and compete with them. I'm thinking of Old Boy and Tony Jaa, this martial arts movie, which is this 5-minute, 7-minute take, incredible athleticism, the Daredevil movies, Extraction. You want to compete with those guys, but at the same time, it became apparent that we needed to serve the story, and the tone of the movie was of it's realistic. We're taking, the stakes are high. It's very serious telling of the story. And as much as we wanted to outdo our other people with the action scenes, it became apparent that no, we need to keep to the tone of what we're doing here. So the action needed to be real. It needed to be realistic. And that was something that we realized, because I kind of wanted to do more, but James was smart to pull it back and say, look, no, it's going to be out of context. And that's something that you see that mistake made in many films, to be honest. The action scene doesn't fit with the rest of the movie. That was actually the problem with when they remade Old Boy. Spike Lee did it. And if you watch that new one that they did in that movie, like if you saw that on its own, and I actually did, I saw that before I saw the movie because I knew the guy that did it, and it's incredible. It's brilliant. But then when you see it in the context of the movie, it's so different to the rest of the film. It sticks out like a sore thumb. So we were very careful to stick to the same tone of the movie, and I think we're very successful doing that. And that's why you get those quiet, realistic moments. I mean, the guy's fighting for his life, and we didn't want my character to be like a superhero Rambo killing too many people, because it just wouldn't be realistic then. And you can feel, I like to think that my character, you can feel that he could die at any moment. And even though he's brave, he's doing what he does and he's good at his job, you feel like he could buy it at any moment, and he's completely exhausted by the end of it.
Yeah. And even though there are different types of combat, from the different firearms that he utilizes, or there's one moment where he's got a knife as well. Again, it's like you said, it still feels very true to this character and true to that. And I think also that comes down to what you were saying earlier about having a lot of experience in movies like this and knowing the specific way to move with different sequences. Like there's the moment where you've got a firearm in one hand and a gun underneath, and your hands are kind of like crossed over in the way that they would be as you're surveying and walking through a space where you're not sure what might come around the corner.
Well, was it very that bit we just did because it looked cool.
Yeah. found out the dirty
we had a great
secret.
military advisor, Tom Lee.
Yeah.
And he was like, there's no reason why I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that, but it does look cool, so maybe do that. There's no reason why not. So we went with it.
Was it quite natural, though, to find what the different movements and the different motions for him would be, and the ways that he would handle each of the different weapons that he utilizes at different points?
Well, as I say, we had Tom, the military advisor, and he was amazing. And I do think that military guys will watch this film and be like, yeah, that's good. And even though Tom is British, there might be some differences in how SEALs would do things. And certainly the way they talk would be different to Brits, obviously. I had a director friend who was best mates with a SEAL, and I could always send a text, how would you say this? I'll get that information back. So that was cool as well. But we move like a team very much so because of Tom, and we couldn't have done this movie without him. And it was even like the little things like I'll walk in through a doorway and he's like, you got to check your corners. Like, oh, yeah, I forgot, check your corners. I mean, he was on us all the time. So you'll see those little things that a military guy will be like, oh, yeah, he's checking corners.
And outside of all of the technical aspects of what it took in order to execute all of these really long takes and ultimately the one shot of the movie, what were the other aspects of shooting this that for you were the most challenging beats of it?
Well, aside from the action, which of course is shattering, the drama, because you're doing pages and pages of dialogue. It's all happening. Every take, you have to give it 100%. You can't normally you get in the coverage and maybe you're not in the shot as much. I'll take a bit of a break on this one. You don't want to be selfish to your other actors, but sometimes you can afford to just chill out a little bit more. But because you never knew which of these takes was going to be the one that's in the finished film, you're given every take. Maybe you've done 25, 30 in a day. Every take, you're giving it 100%. And by the end of the day, even if there's no action, you're absolutely shattered. So yeah, that was difficult.
I'm
And missing lunch. That didn't help either.
looking forward to dinner.
Exactly. Get me out of
I,
here. I'm done.
I'm so impressed what you, James, and the rest of the team have managed to accomplish with this film. And it really is such an immersive experience in watching the film. So I think it's really achieved everything that the two of you first started talking about 6 years ago. So congratulations on everything with the film. And thank you, Scott.
Oh no, thank you. Yeah, James has done an amazing job, and it proves that he's a great director, and he needs to go from strength to strength. And everyone did a cracking job. I'm very proud of the film. I'm glad you liked it.